Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Wyatt Allgaier, and I am the managing editor of Gagosian Quarterly. We are delighted to welcome you all today for a conversation with Dario Calmese, Shayne Oliver, and Grace Wales Bonner. This talk is part of our ongoing series of conversations with artists and leading cultural figures. To introduce our speakers today, there's Dario Calmese. Dario is an artist, designer, writer, and brand consultant based in New York. Classically trained in the performing arts, he uses his knowledge of movement, gesture, and psychology to create complex characters and narratives that explore history, race, class, and what it means to be human. In 2020, he made history as the first Black photographer to shoot a cover for Vanity Fair in its 106-year history with his portrait of Oscar-winning actress Viola Davis. He also launched his widely acclaimed podcast, The Institute of Black Imagination, featuring conversations from the pool of Black genius through the lens of design. He has also directed shows for the fashion brand Pierre Moss. Shayne Oliver founded the New York City-based label Hood by Air in 2006. Famous for its HBA logo, Hood by Air won the CFDA Swarovski Award for menswear and was awarded the inaugural LVMH prize in 2014. In 2017, Oliver and collaborators founded Anonymous Club, an evolving, mutating collective that explores the intersections of creative production. Initiated to up-in tradition and infiltrate the mainstream, the multi-hyphenate team of creators and collaborators behind the collective include Leech, Wench, Ian Isaiah, Earth Eater, Total Freedom, Izzy Spears, Deli Girls, and Omar S., among others. For 3 nights in February 2022, Anonymous Club transformed the Shed in New York with an exhibition and multimedia engagement entitled Headless, The Demonstration. And Grace Wales Bonner launched her label in 2014 following her graduation from Central St. Martin's. Established as a menswear brand, Wales Bonner's soulful tailoring soon expanded to women's wear. In 2015, she was awarded Emerging Menswear Designer at the British Fashion Awards. In 2016, following her first solo runway presentation, Ezekiel, she received the LVMH Young Designer Prize. In 2019, Wales Bonner collaborated with Dior to reinterpret their Resort 2020 collection. Shortly afterwards, she was announced the winner of the BFC Vogue Designer Fashion Fund. In January 2019, Grace Wales Bonner presented her first institutional exhibition, A Time for New Dreams, at London's Serpentine Galleries. She is an associate lecturer at Central St. Martin's, London, and has lectured at Parsons School of Design in New York City. And with that, I will now hand the conversation over to you, Dario. Thanks.
Sarah, Ashley, and everyone on the team. Grace, Shayne, I am so excited to hop into this conversation. It was a pleasure chatting with you all earlier last week. And, before we start, I was just thinking about some things. I literally just took like a free consciousness like stream and just wrote. So I'm just gonna like read a little bit of like what I'm thinking about to ground our conversation today. So I'm thinking about design. I'm thinking about systems. I'm thinking about histories and historic cycles. I'm thinking about fermentation and the role it plays in Black life and funk music. I'm thinking about cycles and epochs. I'm thinking about relations and recipes, science and quanta. I'm thinking about language and the way that it obfuscates more than it enlightens. I think language is a shroud more often than not. I'm thinking about capital and the way that it erodes goodness like sugar on teeth. I'm thinking about consumption and input and output. I'm thinking about agreements and user agreements. I'm thinking about fine print. I'm thinking about the fine print on foodstuffs. What are we agreeing to when we consume? I'm thinking about what does it look like if we design from a place of love so that we don't have to spend so much time dodging danger. I'm thinking about how the media always keeps us in a state of reactivity, anxious that there's always a tiger in the grass, while we passively consume poison daily, and how the pandemic allowed for a space of reflection for however long. I'm thinking about freedom and the compromises of value one is forced to delineate in pursuit of it. This is what I'm thinking about. So, so to kind of ground today's conversation, who would you like to dedicate this conversation to?
Ooh. Dedicate. Grace, do you want to go?
I'm going to dedicate it to you, actually.
Oh. Well, then I will dedicate it to you, back to you. No, yeah, I mean, for sure. Actually, I think that us being in this space together is like a huge, like, I mean, I like a totem pole of people that have been addressing the things that you just touched upon, and you know, it's in real time. So I think that that is due diligence for sure.
And so, what I love about this conversation, what I love about just being in conversation with the two of you is like, I really see the three of us moving through the world, as creatives and artists, and that fashion is just like a part, right? A fashion is just one of the mediums that we use in order to express, our practice. But I think from the outside looking in, people want to define one, right? Like, so they want to say you're a fashion designer, but from the inside looking out, how would you two self-identify?
You want to go?
I like to think of myself as a researcher, really, that being foundational practice, and I see research as a spiritual and artistic practice, and through that, I'm interested in different outputs that that practice can allow space for, and fashion has become a very kind of direct and immediate way of communicating for me. I feel like I realized quite early on that a lot of what I was kind of absorbing can be communicated really directly through clothing. So I realize that's a kind of a direct medium, but there's other mediums. But I think it's a kind of I wouldn't be able to design without this kind of artistic research practice as a grounding point.
Totally. I guess through my career, I've been anthropological and also in design, like kind of what Grace is touching upon. You can get a direct connection through clothing because elitism has been kind of recycled through that, and you can and it's kind of like this whole thing that's happening now where the upcycle of concepts that have been low and now are revered because of the amount of I think the weight is resonates within dress and the way that it's related to people like viewing each other, and it allows for it to be very blatant. It's kind of like instead of having debates and conversations that can be aloof in theory, there are like physical objects that you can intertwine and use as bases to have these discussions. And through the years, that's how I've seen the clothing that makes that creates identity to what I've had to say politically, and then through that, it becomes the end result to like what you want people to actually like move forward with, the understanding of what you want people to take home, like physically, but I see myself now it's always been like artist, for me. I think fashion likes to, if anything, fashion likes to separate the other arts out of conversations, whereas like when you're in contemporary art, you're able to like interact with other artists freely, where it's like it's very taboo in fashion. So I guess now I just consider myself to be an artist, so there's like way more clarity that I'm not trying to accommodate to like specifically just the fashion conversation.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Grace, you mentioned your practice as one of like, research, and research being a spiritual practice. The archive, being a spiritual practice. Could you double tap on that? What does that mean? How does that manifest? What is allowed in that space of like research in the archive?
Well, I think I guess it's this space or something I've kind of created for myself that allows a research process to not necessarily have to have a finished output. I think it's kind of creating space for the validity of absorbing material and looking through material, collecting, archiving, for that to be a valid artistic practice. So not feeling the need for there to be a specific outcome. For me, it's so important to have this space to actually reflect and observe and create or make connections, and that, for me, that's the kind of creative act, is putting these different elements together. But it's also a very I guess instinctive process that just happens. And I think it's kind of moving into fashion, and that's kind of what's happened from since I graduated. There sometimes becomes less space for that practice, which is so important. So it's, for me, it's kind of creating space for it, and for something that's so integral. So it's about kind of me kind of having boundaries around that, and shining a light on it, and just allowing that as a process to exist, really.
Yeah, and what have you discovered about yourself in that process?
Well, I think for me, kind of researching is just very kind of instinctive, and it happens on its own. So yeah, this gathering of materials or looking at people through imagery as well. It's just something that is really natural. Um, yeah, I
Well,
think it's quite. I was thinking about also about Shayne and like what I really appreciate is that you've also created these like specific kind of outlets for yourself as well. Like you've even created these different entities where certain formats, certain mediums can express themselves. And I feel like I'm also creating these formats or finding kind of different space,
Probably.
finding a home for different ideas. And recently I've been thinking actually it's almost like a bit of an identity crisis because which I seem to continue to have, because it's like, okay, this idea can fit into this format, but then where does this format sit in relation to, you know, Wells Bonner? And so I keep having these kind of questions around identity, really, like how certain elements of practice actually sit within a wider whole. But then I also realize that my work is really about identity. So that there's kind of inevitability of having to really think about, you know, is this
Yeah.
work for me as an artist? Is yeah, there's a lot of kind of thinking around those things, which is interesting, and I guess, as I say, inevitable.
Yeah, like when you're having conversations that you know exactly what you want to say, and then the output makes you question what, the actual thing. It's yeah, you're almost like you're reaffirming through through these avenues of how to get the point across, or just like even just relate back to the original concept that you wanted um, to put out, or to document, or whatever the case would be. Now, I really like when you did the exhibition in London. I was just getting to London like a few years ago, and I thought that was like a really good moment, especially like in the time frame, like because like I guess we're like in the same time frame generation, sort of, but not, and I thought like that was really great because like no one just was having those conversations at the time, and I was like, okay, finally there's someone that's uh like there's this word like lifestyle that's being thrown around fashion, which is like so ridiculous to me because like when I go around a lot of like fashion contexts and fashion, just like events, that's not really a thing, and I really felt that drove that conversation home for you, Grace. I thought that was really, really sick, really cool.
I think, thank you. I think also with that exhibition, when I was invited to do that exhibition as a fashion designer, probably what was expected was for me to, you know, do kind of like a fashion exhibition, but then what I did was more of an art show, but it was actually using the space of the gallery to be a spiritual kind of portal. So it was like I wasn't, for me to be a fashion designer, it's like the context is that my work is inspired by a kind of broader Black aesthetic lineage, and I was kind of showcasing like how interconnected my work is to this lineage. But it was like, even the fact that me as a designer, there's a bigger world around it that's not me wanting to represent, you know, clothing on a mannequin. Like I think that was something that was probably not what was expected. So this is also kind of using those opportunities to, like, I had a lot more to express, and so I was really lucky to have that opportunity to be seen in a more holistic light, and for my work to be seen in a holistic light, and to just acknowledge the presence and the history of people that have informed and evolved kind of possibilities for me as a creative, as an artist.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, like, the same goes with the shed and just what happened. It was, you know, there were 3 nights, and the first night was just trying to do as much homage. Like, okay, so that project has a lot to do with like actually the post of it, and so everyone was kind of like, you know, it was like an open studio essentially, that where I was trying to create a space where people felt like there was the back end of the creativity, where it's kind of like the only place where you can kind of like feel it these days. Because like at least like when I see things like, you know, online, unless it's like some long form sort of like film or anything like that, it tends to just like end up looking like an advertorial type of concept. And you know, I just wanted people to be there while I was like running around panicking, or like the feeling of like being in the process, and in the way that sort of HBA shows tended to, like they had like a tendency to have the unraveling take place like in front of you, which is like sort of like not really like the Shayne Oliver conversation per se, but this was like a kind of like a homage to that, like without having it be like connected to the clothing, in the same way that I used to do that with the collective. And you know, there's, you know, it's really important to just put this in a different space so that people can compare and contrast of what is like meant to be seen as also trend, you know, because that is a lot of time what, you know, tends to happen. It's like, oh, like, you know, this is like for this moment, and people like really don't get that this is like not serious business. It's like definitely comes from a sincere line of like people working towards something in a very like historical struggle, grandeur, happiness, you know, just like it comes from a lot of different emotions and real time happenings. And so, you know, I think that those like getting to the ground of like, not, I don't think it's like necessarily like creating museums, but I use the word museum for these like this context. But you know, sometimes you just need to like pace the way that people like perceive things. And that's a lot, like the first night had a lot to do with that. And like, you know, I gave an award to like Andre Walker and as a vanguard, like just under the context of Headless and like looking at what that meant. And you know, bringing Ian back out and like just having these moments where, you know, I think I love like the way that fashion kind of like does like, it's like cool, you know, like the way I think it's the editing style of like, I guess like what I grew up with fashion. But like I think when it comes down to it, and when you're working with a base of things that are based, I didn't mean to say elitism earlier, but like social class, you know, like when you're dealing with things that have those narratives, it's important to take time to like really like have a discussion about those things, you know. And speaking to like what you were saying about your exhibition, Grace. Yeah.
Yeah, what I think is really dope is, you know, Grace, like your practice, you know, of digging in the archive, you know, right? It's kind of like a crate digging. Whereas Shayne, like you're actually creating a new archive, you know, like you're actually creating today's archive for a Grace to look back to and respond 40 years from now. And you spoke a little bit earlier about just, voids, right? Like voids that existed within the industry, conversations that were not happening. Like, what were some of those spaces that you're trying to fill?
Um, okay, well, at the time it was, it was bleak in New York. I mean, I'm pretty sure in other cities, like as I began to travel and things like that, like the camaraderie was like, intense, immense. And in New York at the time, I just noticed that there were a lot of mood boards filled with Black imagery and a lot of conversations that were happening around it, usage of the men, in private moments and women, just like things that were like more just like accessory driven and like, stylist assistants, like, and not really like no main characters. And I kind of worked from the inspiration up, like because like these were top tier conversations that were happening that I was seeing through like my journeys. Like this is like interning. This is working in like we're even working in retail, even like going like trying to go to like fashion school and being around like just like all the aspects. I kind of like I just my investigation was just like I was just curious, and yeah, it was really not in a good space, and I was like, well, let me validate all of these reference points so that they are not like castaway concepts and things that like felt like they could, you hire, it's like per hour, you get a Black influx or injection, there's like a point of reference. And that was just like the initial ethos, and from there, the design aspirations and desires of the team began to flow within those boundaries. So it's like, myself, Akeem Smith, Isaiah, like our concepts and like the different places that we were coming from. Like, I think like, like Akeem is like, to me, like in the same boat of what we're talking about, but was designing collections while styling, and then influencing newer designs, you know what I mean? And that's not to say that there wasn't any validation for anyone else that was like working with us, because like for instance, like Paul Kupo, who works with us, but I'm talking about like the initial conversations that were between like the three, and then also Raul, who like left around 2009 and to go to DR and work on Loire. But like these were like things that we were like just like highlighting the how what we knew people could see, but how we really felt about those things, the passion that was within those reference points. And I think the passion is like where the design started to flourish, like where the pushing began. Because like when it's so bottled up and so like you kind of are like, it's like yeah, just being like the quiet person in class, and then all of a sudden you're just fed up and you're like listen, like, and you may be getting all the good grades, but you're not really being heard, and so like yeah, that was like what I saw. I mean, in a roundabout way of like the initial conversations, this is like what was happening. This is also like going through like art conversations, like being around, like I used to collaborate a lot with Rashad Newsome and work with like choreograph things with Dash Snow, and like even do like presentations like at Terrence Coe's like establishments, and like I was just like observing these things, and they were also just like painfully white spaces that just felt like, and it was like it was interesting to see how it was like when the Black like identities came into this space, it was like shut it down. You know what I mean? Like the physical like being there was like what people like, it's, you know, it's like, again, like they want you to be assistant, they want you to be like the muse or whatever. And like though that's the spaces where like being injected, at least when I was present with this sort of energy, and but not no main characters, no visibility, or it would be like very like, it was just like downright racist at times, you know. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna stop. But yeah, that was the moment that was there during the time, you know. It was like, it's how far I was like go down, you know, like on the ground, pushing to be visible, like pushing, and everyone knew that he's a genius. Everybody, you know. So it was just like a like, and so I think like it was about building that platform, even if it was like not for just like for myself. Like I'm so happy that this is like what's happening now, you know, and like especially like I think New York, you know, I mean, and like now, like I think like London is definitely getting to that gear too. Like, you know, I don't want to speak for your space, but like I see it happening there a lot too. And I think Grace, like you obviously had a lot to do with that. And like I think there's always been like Black design, but like just like the force of it being like, yeah, just taken. And I think it's the way that we're speaking about it. You know what I mean? It's like not like we're like being like, we should be cool. It's like we're actually like breaking it down and like creating those platforms. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Grace, do you want to respond?
Well, I think it's interesting to hear how you saw it, because I feel like there's a similar issue I was seeing, but from a completely different kind of angle, really, being in London, and I guess maybe thinking probably more about European history also. And but I think when I started Bosbonner, and when I was studying, yeah, it was like a reaction to seeing how Blackness was kind of utilized in a very kind of ephemeral, or yeah, just kind of as a gesture, but not like in a very considered or sustainable or thoughtful way. So like my objective was to, you know, be really committed and studious, and look at Black culture and history in a very timeless sense, to you know, to show that this wasn't a trend. This is like a long-term kind of institution that I'm creating. And I think you talked before about the archive and digging, which I don't really like that terminology, but I think like it was kind of about revealing beauty, a sense of beauty or a sense of elegance, like a black elegance that I was so familiar with, like the people in my life, or through art, and through I was so exposed to these images of kind of Black beauty, Black masculinity, Black elegance, and grace, and sensitivity. But within fashion, it wasn't. I was seeing a very narrow like vision of Black masculinity specifically, which was kind of to signify like the street in a way, and even with casting as well, it was very if there were Black models, they'd be quite a specific physique, and it was a very kind of like typecast model. So actually, like the fact that there's much more of a myriad of representations, I think that's what I was really interested in, like broadening the spectrum of representation. Like, what's the multiplicity within Blackness? Like, what are like trying not to resolve into such a singular narrative. It was always like showing the possibilities, showing the kind of infinite possibilities, infinite ways of being, but also that have always existed in history as well. So it's kind of, in a sense, just revealing a sense of beauty, dignity, grace that was really visible to me, visible to my friends. But like for fashion, it was very surprising. It was like, wow, like this this is like seeing these very elegant, refined men. That was like kind of quite shocking, like to people at that moment. You know, it was like quite shocking to people when it first, the first kind of collections I did. So that was kind of surreal, but in a way, people did actually, even the press, they were willing to consider what I was saying in quite a deep way from quite early on, which was also very surprising to me.
Yeah, and oh, sorry.
Well, yeah, it's just that people were willing to actually listen and like think about it a little bit, which was really encouraging.
Yeah, because it's like sort of like, you know, for a while, I mean, everyone kind of knows this, right? It's like if you're, you know, engaging with, I mean, it's like, you know, the Black identity, Black presence has been there, you know, and I think, you know, it took a while for maybe like designers like yourself to come around for that to happen. And it just has to do, you know, initially, like, I think with the idea of like what people find to be fascinating about fashion, right? It's like the gesturing or reference of either really inspiring people, you know, these sorts of things. And I think that the tone and the attitude had to like kind of just recalibrate out of this moment where once it's like, if all the bodies are in this specific conversation, then it's never going to change, right? You have to change like from the floor up. It's like the casting. You have to go and find these people and like bring them to the table, which like also was like, I think a huge aspect of what made the work at Hood by Air special was like the casting and like the want and the need to find more kinds of Black identities and bring them into the space, and then people respect them. Because I remember, you know, not to like harp on older times, but there were moments where that was very confrontational, like not from the press, right? I think that the press always was like, they were inviting to, like you said, like like, but like internally, you know, it was like, are you gonna go there, or is this like is this what you're gonna do? That doesn't mean contemporary. That doesn't mean this. And it's like when you have to kind of just create that's when you like reinvent even more, right? Because you're like, well, actually that's not contemporary. You have to say what's not at that point. You know, these are the things that aren't like contemporary. And yeah, it was just I really enjoyed that time. But like, I don't want to say gesturing because it's like very loaded, but it's just gesturing. It really is. It's like the new attitude. And I think that that's also like why the people around me were so important for it, because like you were saying, like this Black masculinity and like what that means to be, like a Black male identifying like person. And even like historically, where things like family figures and like things like that, like I don't really like, even just like the women that I know that are in my family have been like the male identity too, you know, like in the sense of like the power of like masculinity, like, which I think transcends between obviously both genders and you know, identities and whatnot, and all identities. And you know, I got my teaching from like the women in my family, like about the black masculinity, and then I applied it to like how I saw the men in my life that also were the male figures in my life, like Ian, you know, for instance, like you know, he's so fluid between the two, you know, that's like, to me, like great. And then, you know, like being, you know, like when I came to America, it was very much like the typecast from prior. And then like when I started like kind of going back into the roots of like Trinidadian roots, and like thinking about the men that I grew up around, how they were just so great, like graceful and you know, the way that they carried themselves, you know, was so. I had to decompress, you know, when getting into like how I was perceived, like in these situations, like just also being like a Black man, you know, and going into these spaces and like not being like what is like being taken seriously, like, you know, because like, you know, there's like the masculine, like the typecast that's like, you know, they can essentially they fought to get into the space, right, to do what they are, which like kind of lent itself from music history itself to also like with hip hop and like kind of being entrepreneurial through that. And then there are like totally like a lot of different, you know, that also were considered cool, right? It's like this thing of like Black masculinity that is considered cool and also different from that typecast, you know, and showing like you have to like show the breadth of it, which is again like leads back to this kind of thing of a little bit of lifestyle, you know, and yeah, just like I don't know if it's story building because it's not a story, it's like anthropological, I would say. I go back to that word. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's really a story about like the gaze, right? Like who is like looking and then who's also producing. I mean, you know, Grace, and thank you so much for that correction. But you know, even me working with fashion brands, working as a casting director, show director, like I remember when you hit the scene, like you literally changed the shape of like Black masculinity in fashion. Like you completely shifted that silhouette, you know. And Shayne, you know, you did the same thing with really expanding, you know, our conversation, you know, around gender and gender norms. But you spoke about something earlier, you know, and we're about to wrap up. um, you know, that what you were saying, right, like in this space of quote unquote like gesturing, um, what you were saying was actually much deeper, like much richer than a trend. um and Grace, you know, the same, right? Like really just wanting to reveal a life that you witnessed, right, that was not reflected in these places of representation, or you know, Black bodies as consumption, right? So what does it mean, what does it feel like to explore these identities and ways of being in public, right, for consumption? It's not just about like one's own practice and discovery, but it's on a stage, right? Like it is rubbing up against like a capital machine.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Grace, and then
That's-
and then follow up with a little Shayne, then we'll wrap it up.
I think I think I draw a lot of strength from what I guess what I'm connecting to, which is kind of an Afro-Atlantic spirit, I would say. So I think because I feel such connection to the past, also to my ancestors, also like there's such a grounding in this kind of lineage, or an idea of a brotherhood in some way, that it's such a reserve for me that gives me strength in the space I'm in. So I think it's just understanding the roots. Like I'm not, you know, really alone. It's like everything that I do or that's inspired me, it's kind of part of a much bigger web that is kind of past, present, and future. So that kind of is something that I'm connecting to, and it motivates me. But I think it's about, you know, also, and that, yeah, and I feel like there's many designers that are also doing this, is like elevating the location of Blackness within culture, and that's through art. You know, artists are doing this, writers across history, but it's like it's part of a bigger conversation that's been going on for a long time. So I think that's where that's a deeper connection that overrides other realities and times as well.
Totally. No, that makes sense. Like, I mean, you know, at times, like, which is kind of why I've been drawn, like, I mean, I've kind of realized why I was so drawn to like also streetwear, like, as a conversation that like led a lot of what happened at Hood by Air, and it was because like the way that people interact with t-shirts is like merchandise. It's like merch, like as if you were there for the moment, and then you're taking like that one band t-shirt home or whatever. And I think that's how when it came to that work, like viewed clothing. You know, it's like you're taking this like artifact of this like staging away, and so when you wear it, there's an understanding of like what that is. Like you understand that there was a message being said, like you are wearing this logo because of this reason, you know, whether, and you know, yeah, where the design and the excitement and the message takes that as far as a trajectory, to who that influences and who also just like visually resonates with it is like another conversation that I, you know, can't really control, but that is like the intent of like what the streetwear, you know, like to me, and like the simplicity of the garments, and like, am I creating, like, you know, it's like I'm creating formal wear so people feel the formality of like what I'm talking about, and I'm creating denim so that they can have the conversation on a regular basis, or there's like a consensus that this idea is passing around into the sphere of like, yeah, like of the world and consumerism, and also like allowing for like larger, yeah, conversations to be had that are similar to that. Yeah.
That's really powerful.
Yeah, that's really amazing, Shayne. Like, thank you both for sharing this afternoon with us here at Gagosian and with me personally. It's been such a pleasure. I have so many other questions. We could talk for forever. I feel like we're like just getting to like the meat of it. So Sarah, you'll have to bring us back for a round two. But for everyone watching, thank you all again. Really, really appreciate it. And that concludes this
Thank you
talk.
both.
Wyatt, come on back.
See you later, Grace.
And thank you to all three of you from Gagosian. We really appreciate it. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. We understand schedules are busy, time is precious, and we're just really grateful that you were able to join us. Please be sure to subscribe to our newsletter for up-to-date updates on Gagosian events such as this. Again, thank you, Grace. Thank you, Shayne. Thank you, Dario.
Okay, bye.
Bye.